Okay, in this section, we're looking at midpoints and bisectors. So the first thing we want to look at is the definition of congruent. When geometric figures have the same shape and size, figures have the same measure, they are considered congruent. So this is the equal sign, means equal. The congruent sign is an equal sign with a little squiggly on top. Segment AB is congruent to segment BC. Midpoint, a point on a line segment that divides it into two congruent segments. B is the midpoint, therefore AB is equal to BC. Example 1, is M a midpoint of segment AB? Well, if we use the segment addition postulate, we can say AM plus MB equals AB and make our substitutions and find that AM equals 18. Well, 18 does not equal 16. Therefore, AM does not equal MB, and therefore M is not the midpoint. Okay, so let's take a look at the midpoint between two coordinates here. If I essentially find the slope here between these 2 points, which means I'm going down 4 and over 8, if I take half of each of those numbers, it gives me the location of the midpoint, which would end up being -1 on the x and 4 for the y. So this is a visual way of finding it. So I can find this algebraically as well. So given these 2 points, x sub 1, y sub 1, and x sub 2, y sub 2, I can find the midpoint by adding the 2 x coordinates together and dividing by 2, and the y coordinates together and dividing by 2. So for example 2, I'm finding the midpoint between 9, -2 and -5, 14. I encourage you to label the points here so you don't confuse them on the formula. I'm going to rewrite the same formula as above and just substitute x sub 1, x sub 2, and y sub 1 and y sub 2. We're adding the coordinates and dividing it by 2, and I get 2, 6. That's the coordinates for my midpoint. Okay, example 3, if M at 3, -1 is the midpoint of segment AB and B is 7, -6, find A. So in this case, we know one endpoint, which is B, and we know the midpoint, M, and we're trying to find A. So we can use the same formula as we did before for the midpoint. I'm going to call x sub m and y sub m our midpoint coordinates, and b we'll call x sub 2, y sub 2. So we're looking for x sub 1, y sub 1. So if I break up my formula and set x sub m equal to x1 plus x2 over 2, and y sub m equals y1 plus y2 over 2, and substitute what's given, I can solve for x sub 1, and I can solve for y sub 1. This is just like a 2-step equation from algebra. And I get -1, 4. So that's my point A, -1, 4. Or the other way we could do this is find the distance between the midpoint and point B for x, for the x values. So the midpoint is at 3 and the y value is at 7. So that means that the other point A must be 4 units on the other side. So that would be 3 minus 4 would be -1. For the y values, I could say -6 minus a -1 is -5. And then -1 minus -5 is 4. So again, we get the same point, negative 1, 4. Either way works. Okay, next one, segment bisector. A line, segment, or ray that passes through a midpoint of another segment, like we see here on the figure to the right. But then we also have a perpendicular bisector, which is a line, segment, or ray that passes through a midpoint of another segment at a right angle. So on the figure here we see line DE is the perpendicular bisector of segment AC, so that segment AB is congruent to segment BC, and line DE is perpendicular to segment AC. Example 5, which line is the perpendicular bisector of segment MN? Well, we see that line OQ is the perpendicular bisector here of segment MN, and that line SR is just a bisector. It's not a perpendicular bisector. Example 6, algebra connection, find x and y. So notice in the figure here that 3x minus 6 is a length of a segment, and the 4y minus 2 degrees is a measure of an angle. So we see the congruent symbols here. We can set up the equation that AM equals MB, so 3x minus 6 equals 21. Add 6 to both sides. I get 3x equals 27. Divide by 3. X equals 9. So we know this is a perpendicular bisector. So this angle here we know is 90 degrees. So an M is the midpoint. So we can say that 4y minus 2 equals 90 degrees. So add 2 to both sides and divide by 4. 94 goes into 92 23 times, so y equals 23. And that's it.